Opening up to the world, how the Bar Convent moved on from the underground years. By 1866, when the house diaries begin, the Catholic Church had been free to live and worship openly for some 37 years, since Catholic Emancipation was accepted by Parliament in 1829. The ladies at the bar, as they had been known, were no longer Mrs., but mother or sister. They wore religious dress and were doing their best to have their house known as St. Mary's Convent. The official title, St. Mary's Convent, Micklegate Bar Without, which means outside the bar walls, and their school accordingly as St. Mary's, though Bar Convent turned out to be the enduring name. Here you have the draft school prospectus, from very draft with all the crossings out, with the new name St. Mary's Convent as it was thought of in 1840. But Bar Convent was the name that lasted. The period we shall be looking at today can be thought of in three phases, each with its particular spirit: middle 19th century, late 19th century, and the First World War into post-war time of the 20th century. The community had grown. Numbers are seldom mentioned, but we hear at one point of 43 members, including choir sisters, lay sisters, novices, and postulants. Candidates, postulants, and novices are often mentioned. There is a fairly steady flow into the community, though, of course, not all stay. There are departures before vows are made, and occasionally even later. And there are deaths, sometimes of quite young sisters. But compared with penal times, the community is large. There was still a separation between day school, sometimes still referred to as poor school, and boarding school, referred to in the diaries as the young ladies' school till late in the century. And the young women concerned are always referred to as young ladies. But Catholic parishes were flourishing and also beginning to have their schools. St. George's from 1850, St. Wilfrid's in its present position from 1864, English Martyrs 1882. The bar community played an important part in suggesting the foundation of that parish, offering land rent-free for a year for the beginning of what was first known as the English Martyrs Mission, and supporting the school once it was started. The community was also involved in St. George's School from 1852 till 1874, when the infant girls and boys were put together, and Mother Juliana Martin, who was the superior at that time, insisted that current regulations forbade the sisters to teach boys. In 1875, when it was known that there would be schools at St. Wilfrid's, Mother Juliana wrote to the parish priest, Dr. Render, explaining that it was part of the community's mission to serve the poor in the city, and indicating willingness to help. Dr. Render had, however, already heard what had happened at St. George's and engaged the Sisters of Charity of St. Paul. He suggested, however, that the bar might make financial contributions from the fees received in their schools. A long correspondence follows through July and August 1875. He is afraid that St. Mary's, the bar, will take pupils away from St. Wilfrid's unless their fees are raised so that only middle-class families will be able to afford them. Eventually, a compromise is reached. On the 6th of September, the schools, formerly known as day or poor schools, opened for the children of parents able to pay 8 shillings, now about £24 per quarter, for infants, 10 shillings, now about £30 for older children. 21 children are admitted, 3 of whom are Protestants. In 1867, there had been 53, and 220 in St. George's, where numbers were increasing. Comparative statistics on school attendance are an important feature of Mother Juliana's diary entries. By December, Dr. Render was suggesting even higher fees of the convent. Then, by May 1877, he was encouraging the sisters to receive privately on much lower terms any children not attending our congregational, that is, our parish schools, and not to make public announcements about fees. Nothing is recorded about parental reactions. But what is certain is that numbers at the Bar Day School fluctuate very much in the 19th century with the foundation of parish schools. There is another drop to 24 in 1882 when English Martyrs School opens. And this gives you a list, you see. 1867, 50 plus, 1868, 60 plus, then a huge drop when St. Wilfrid's School opens, then back again by 1879, but in 1882, when English Martyrs School opened, numbers dropped dramatically once again. We learn other aspects of education from the diaries. Evidently, school life is becoming strict. Mother Juliana mentions going regularly into the day school to examine children in various subjects. She also examines the young ladies, and there is a half-yearly examination of pupil teachers. In 1867, 5 of them at different stages in their training were examined in English, history, grammar, reading, prose, poetry, recitation, domestic economy, geography, and catechism. The standard was generally satisfactory. At the same time, 30 young ladies took exams in piano and singing and were found only, upon the whole, satisfactory. Each year in both schools there are examines in December and July. At this time, there's no fixed system of term and holidays for the young ladies, who are noted as entering or leaving school at various ages and stages. 1876 was evidently exceptional. On the 19th of August, it is noted that all the young ladies are away for the holidays, a circumstance without parallel since the foundation of the house in 1686. There are subsequent years in which some pupils stay in school throughout the summer. Other events are also according to circumstances. Usually there is what is known as an exhibition each year in July, which seems to have been an occasion for musical and dramatic performances, and perhaps an element of what in later times would be called speech day. But in 1887 we read, "No exhibition this year. Too many children left school in 1886. The 17 newcomers are little ones." The young ladies were always of mixed ages, some arriving in late teens, even aged 20 evidently, for a kind of finishing experience, sometimes in connection with being received into the church and being given more grounding in their new faith. But Bar Convent interests were by no means only bound up in schools. This is a period of wide-ranging contact with the Whole Mary Ward Institute, first by exchange of letters, but also very soon by visits. The bar had become isolated in Mother Coyney's time. Yes, she was quite a severe woman, and her veil is pulled down very firmly, because apparently on one occasion, someone remarked how attractive one of the young sisters looked in her habit, and Mother Coyney was determined to stop anything like that. But in Mother Coyney's time, 1810 to 1826, as you see, when contact with the Nymphenburg Generalate had been lost through the Napoleonic Wars, Hammersmith had ceased to exist through lack of members, and the Institute only began to exist again in the south of England with the foundation of Gloucester in 1862, not from York, but from Ireland and Augsburg. It is no wonder that Elizabeth Coyney saw no solution but to go under the authority of the bishop. She had to have confirmation of her office from some church source. But 1860s York was in touch with Patna, Calcutta, and Darjeeling, hearing about famine and, quote, souls sent to heaven in mass baptisms of the dying, and about new foundations in India. In 1871, Mother Delphina Hart stayed for 5 weeks on her way to Ireland, and the following year, more briefly, on her return journey to Calcutta with a novice. In 1872 also, Mother Hogan wrote from Darjeeling telling of plans for a new foundation in Lucknow to celebrate the Rathfarnham Jubilee, 50 years since the foundation. She also visited twice in 1876, the second time with 12 new members for Calcutta. In 1867, the first letter since 1816 arrived from Nymphenburg, and little by little contact was resumed. In 1867 also came a letter from the General Superior in Rathfarnham with news of the progress of houses and schools. In October 1868 came gifts for Mother Angela Brown on her Jubilee. She also was a much kindlier lady than she looks on this rather severe painted portrait, and she was referred to as the only surviving member of the Institute who was in the noviceship with Reverend Mother Teresa Ball. In 1875, there is news of the foundation in Ballarat, Australia, with a description of Mother Gonzaga Barry, the leader of the group. Interesting in the light of her work for Union later in the century. From 1889, there are visits from Rathfarnham and Manchester, and from then on, visits and exchanges continue. Before the end of the century, there are letters and visits from Toronto and Ballarat, and in 1878, a letter from the pioneers in Pretoria, Transvaal. The diarist comments that it is a joy to realize that our institute is now in all 5 continents. No wonder that York, the house which formed Frances Teresa Ball, and her companions for religious life should have this instinctive sense of unity. The same feeling for whole institute is present in Mother Juliana Martin's urge to work for the approbation of the Institute, that is, official Roman approval of it as a religious congregation, which she achieves in 1877. The same feeling is expressed in much international correspondence under Mother Loyola Giles, Superior 1883 to 1891, and Mother Frances Pope, 1897 to 1909, urging the union of the whole institute, then divided into the generalates of Nymphenburg, St. Pölten, Mainz, Rathfarnham, and Toronto. It was thwarted at the time of the Union chapter in 1900 by the action of Bavarian secular authorities and Irish bishops, as we know from other sources. The events of 1900 are passed over in almost total silence in the diaries. This is perhaps the moment to look at the influence on York of close episcopal supervision, specifically by the bishop who features most in the diaries, Bishop Robert Cornthwaite, Bishop of Beverley, 1861 to 1878, then, when the diocese was divided, of Leeds from 1878 until his death in 1990. Since one very positive aspect of his relationship with the community was his familiarity with Vatican bureaucracy, which is evident in the diaries at various times. He had been rector of the English College in Rome from 1851 to 1857, and it appears in our house diaries how often he was in Rome as bishop. Here he is beside Mother Juliana in that same portrait. And you might look at him and think, yes, he looks a slightly fierce man, but he was also all kinds of other things. In March 1870, he had been dismissive of Mother Juliana's suggestion of a petition for approbation. He writes, "You have as much, approbation that is, as any have got, and probably much more than most." But he gave permission for the petition on the 28th of June, 1876. She wrote many letters to superiors and bishops all over the world, but in the end was supported only by the Bishop of Patna and Bishop Cornthwaite himself. All the same, he was able to read the decree of approbation to the community at the end of Mass on 19th March 1877, less than a year later. His experience on canonical matters must also have been helpful in the many details concerning the attestation of the relic of the True Cross, the making of the reliquary, and the rules concerning veneration in 1867 to 68. You can learn more about the True Cross in the Living Heritage exhibition in the Bar Convent. He was also concerned in the long-running correspondence with Mother Juliana over lay sisters' vows, when she had many doubts concerning the practice established by previous superiors. But the list of many letters, visits, and instructions to the community, which begins in February 1866 and goes on till July 1888, not long before his death, concerns much that seems trivial and paternalistic to us now, though probably forced upon him by canon law on women religious as it then was. We read, for example, that the children, with permission from the bishop, visited the community room and noviceship and were permitted to take part in a religious procession through community areas of the house. The bishop gave leave to use willow pattern china, still to be seen exhibited in the great parlour and in the exhibition, because it was cheaper than plain white. It is also much more attractive. The time of Sunday Mass was changed from 7 to 7:30 with the bishop's permission. It's a shock to read that on the 13th of February 1882, quote, "Some of our pupils attended English Martyrs' Mass as there was no Mass from our chaplain." and to realize that the sisters did not go. Then it becomes clear that it must have been a matter of regulations, when on the 6th of March, with special leave from the bishop, the community paid a visit to the Blessed Sacrament in the new church. Just occasionally, the bishop seems to be taking advantage. The diary for the 11th October 1873 says, "By the direction of the Lord Bishop, we purchased 12 silver forks for parlour use. The cost was £9 10s. In the 1870s, that sum would have been a skilled tradesman's wages for about 6 or 7 weeks. But he was interested in the children. He suggests that they should have a magic lantern, supports the suggestion of a lending library, writes a play for them to perform. He makes good suggestions. For example, that a storeroom might be converted into a place to receive tradespeople. He sets in motion a complicated but necessary process of regularizing the legal situation of the property in Scarborough. He is interested in Mary Ward and passes on documents concerning her to the community. For several months, October 1879 to March 1880, when the community, including Mother Juliana and the young ladies, are laid low by a scarlet fever epidemic, there is no diary except transcripts of daily letters to Mother Juliana from Bishop Cornthwaite. Plainly, he is deeply concerned, living and praying through the experience with the community. At the beginning, he writes, "I am with you all in my deepest sympathies and earnest prayers. Our Lord gives you the cross and presses you to it. Embrace it with all your will. He will have compassion when and in what way he knows best." The letters are short, often a mixture of spirituality and practical advice. "I'm much relieved by your better news. I thank God heartily and pray that he may soon comfort you and all of us. You had better give all meat every day. Let Saint Teresa speak to you as she prayed to her own soul." He quotes the whole prayer, "Let nothing disturb thee, nothing affright thee," and concludes, "Now, a word as to the child who is recovering. Let her clothes be well stoved and washed, out of the house if you can. Let her be kept very clean and washed with vinegar and water from time to time. A blessing for all." On the 14th of December, he writes, "Don't be uneasy or discouraged about anything. Let all remember this. Our divine Lord knows well how much you can bear, and he will not overburden you. Moreover, he is quietly supplying strength, but only in sufficient quantity to let you feel your own weakness. Leave it all to him. Be content. Know for certain that he is not only always with you, he is caring for you and training you. You will have great things to do for him, and he is wishful that you should only have them to do when experience has taught you that you have nothing, are nothing, and can do nothing but in him, with him, and by him." By the 15th of January, he's able to go back to practical mode. "Glad to know from your note that all are going on well. As soon as the doctors think it well, set to work with your whitewashing, papering, and scrubbing, so as to admit some children at least, even before Easter. The relationship on both sides is deepened. The diary for July 1889, not long before his death, reads, "No exhibition this year. We had no heart for it without the bishop." But that is anticipating. After the success over the approbation and the new edition of the 1703 Clement XI rules, there are other legal matters, probably most interestingly, the question of new constitutions for York. This was a time of much constitution writing in various parts of the Institute. Probably the most interesting point that emerges is the petition that York might be erected into a congregation under a superior general with a permanent seat in York. The answer came from Rome in August 1886. No steps will be taken until other houses are opened. Reasonable enough. A generalate needs more than one house, or there's no point in its existence. The Roman authorities were puzzled. Who are these sisters and what do they want? If they're English virgins, they are already approved and have a general superior. If they want to become a new institute, there's something destructive in their request. The community statement in answer names the existing generalates, but says, owing to the variety of names and the independence of house and branches, the essential unity of the institute is not readily recognized. It points out York's role in the approbation of 1877 and explains how separation from Munich came about for purely political reasons. Now they need to return to a normal form of government and to become a mother house for new foundations, as has already been allowed for the younger branch in Ireland. Approval for an experimental period of 3 years arrived in November 1888 and for an indefinite time in 1894. But by then, in 1890, Bishop Cornthwaite had died, Mother Juliana Martin in 1892, and Father John Morris, SJ, who wrote the document, in 1893, dramatically in the pulpit while he was preaching. York had no filiation until the foundation of Cambridge in 1898. And by then, interest had moved to desire for union and the sense that the movement to achieve recognition of Mary Ward as founder would be advanced by union. Discussion of union had also begun to create interest in the need for common constitutions. The York Generalate died a natural death. In February 1911, Reverend Mother Teresa from Ascot visited York, bringing with her the newly approved constitutions from Nymphenburg. The York and Cambridge communities declared their willingness to accept these constitutions and to be reunited with the Nymphenburg Generalate. The process concluded in July, so at last the bar was reunited juridically with the International Institute after almost 100 years of standing alone, and the role of the bishop decreased. At the same time, all this time, the Bar Convent was opening up to its immediate surroundings. Every year we read of gifts made at Christmas time to local poor women, including clothes made specially by the community. In January 1918, we read of food for the poor as usual, in spite of the shortages of wartime. The community was also generous in hospitality to other religious in need. Notably, in the 1870s, to French sisters in difficulties because of the Franco-Prussian War. It's interesting and rather moving to read that the poor Irish immigrant community at St. George's also wanted to help them. Some even pawned their clothes to raise money or went without their dinner in order to have something to give. Some of the opening up came in unexpected ways. A Jubilee celebration in December 1872 included a model of the Lourdes Grotto, which was so successful that someone had the idea of creating a larger version. It was put up in the infant school. Children and parents came to see it, brought friends and neighbours, and for 9 days in the new year, it became a place of pilgrimage. There was a grand benediction, priests of the city assisting, carols were sung, accompanied on the accordion by a very reverend canon. The apparition of Our Lady was reenacted. Later, a priest from St. Wilfrid's gave a siphon to produce the sound of running water, and a local clockmaker lent a most valuable musical box, the sweet sound of which, alternating with hymns to Our Lady, were a great attraction to the grotto. Many local people came, Protestants as well as Catholics. The diarist recounts that they were often rough men walking on tiptoe in their heavy boots, so as not to disturb the atmosphere of devotion. About 1,500 people came, some of them several times. Some weeks later, there were accounts of special graces through Our Lady of Lourdes, including the healings of a young man with a painful lump inside him, and an older man with chronic bronchitis, who was inspired to make a vow of prayer after his visit to the grotto, when his young daughter noticed that he had not coughed once while he was there. Both had drunk the special water given by the sisters, which also features in the deathbed conversion of a 73-year-old woman. She had been to the grotto, water was sent, but repeatedly failed to flow from the bottle until prayers had been said. At last she was convinced, and Dr. Render arrived just in time to hear her confession, baptize her, and give her communion. Some regular events began, bringing people into the house. Ladies' retreats, which became annual in July 1882. In 1892, the first recorded visit of a big pilgrimage group, over 1,000, in honour of St. William of York. In 1899 and subsequent years, the pilgrimage came in great numbers to see the relics. New organisations were started in the bar. In 1911, the Boys' Brigade, for boys in Protestant schools receiving no religious instruction, run by Mother Loyola Giles. At the first meeting, 12 boys came, were enthusiastic, and gave the names of 10 more. The diaries go on to recount sports, parades, camps, a garden party for their parents, displays in the concert hall, and the contribution of their band to many occasions, notably the Corpus Christi procession. In 1918 came the Catholic Women's League, with 70 women joining immediately. A year later, they borrow the concert hall to perform a play. With Mother Frances Pope as superior, came new developments for the sisters themselves. The founding of the Cambridge House in 1898, with Mother Eucharia loaned from Rathfarnham for 3 years in 1901 as superior. The beginning of annual holiday parties of sisters staying in houses lent by friends of the community or rented. They go over the years to Egton Bridge, Harrogate, Plessington, Filey, and Beverley, to name just a few places. There are educational developments for the sisters themselves to begin with. Already in 1871, it is recorded that a sister Estella, surname not quoted, has spent several days in Liverpool for government examinations. Later, there are visits by superiors and headmistresses to Mount Pleasant Training College in Liverpool, to Ensley Training College in Hull, as well as to the Loretto schools in Manchester. They attend meetings of religious called by the Cardinal in Westminster to discuss university degrees for sisters. Evidently, the great worry is over accommodation for student sisters, so a hostel in connection with Bedford College, London, is suggested. The first two York sisters, Elizabeth Dunn and Joseph Scott Allen, who both entered in 1914, began at Bedford in 1918, staying during term time in England's Lane, the then Hampstead House. Academic work by sisters begins to receive some encouragement. Already in August 1898, Mother Loyola Giles is allowed to go to London to visit the British Museum to procure material for her works. She wrote many spiritual books which were highly popular and was a woman of many interests. In 1902, the headmasters of Catholic colleges had met in the bar in the Great Parlour. In 1918, they asked if a member of the community could write a paper for their coming conference, and Mother Loyola wrote a paper encouraging the study of apologetics. Earlier, the diary records that she had already given a well-attended lecture on the Passion. The building of the school concert hall in 1906 was a significant moment for the community as well as the children. From then on, there are many references to lectures being given, as well as to plays performed by the school and by other groups within the Catholic community. It was, of course, only 8 years later, a vital resource as a hospital ward for wounded soldiers, both Belgian and English, during the 1914 to 18 war. But that part of the Bar story has been well period. A great preoccupation was gaining state recognition for the school. In October 1919, Mr. Mason, Secretary of the Education Committee, visited the day and boarding schools, was much surprised and pleased, and encouraged the quest for recognition. In February 1920, he came again on an unofficial visit with an HMI, Mr. Newbold, with a view to a future inspection. Meanwhile, school activities were developing, especially in sport. 2 new tennis courts, hockey and cricket introduced on the Knavesmire, netball and basketball and drill competitions against other schools, victories recorded with evident satisfaction. Girl guides started in the day school. There was the first meeting of an old girls' club, and lectures, plays, concerts given by all kinds of local groups. Early in 1922, Aladdin, performed by the Catholic Young Men's Club, a complete success. The following year, the group came back with their pantomime, Sleeping Beauty, and there were outside speakers. The well-known Maisie Ward came for a weekend in September 1923 to coach members of the Catholic Evidence Guild. And there were also performances by the children in the concert hall, which becomes more and more an indispensable resource. In January 1920, the boarding school acted 2 plays, Prince Charming and Princess Radiant and The Mask of Pandora, to a full hall of day school and day school parents, Boys' Brigade and Guild, with a repeat performance for the bishop, the mayor and family, boarders' parents, staff of the Mount York College and the municipal school, Mr. Mason, and, quote, many other important people. In June 1921, there was a 2-day bazaar and garden fete to raise money for school equipment. £500 spent on geographical instruments, new desks, gym apparatus, and hat and coat stands for the new cloakrooms. In 1921, a formal application was made for inspection and recognition by the Board of Education. 2 inspectors came in September, examined everything, heard lessons in all subjects, and were much pleased. In September 1923, the major change came. The top classes of the day school were closed. The Catholic College for Girls, later the Bar Convent Grammar School, was opened in connection with the boarding school, and the former day school became preparatory school and kindergarten. The kindergarten rooms at the corner of Nunnery Lane were furnished as science and art rooms. They actually remained as such until the greatest change of all, when the school became All Saints RC Comprehensive in 1985 as part of the City of York's new plan for secondary education. Earlier in 1923, the school had taken over number 19, the former chaplain's house, when the bishop asked the community to consent to his withdrawal of the chaplain for other duties than the diocese, while the English martyrs would be given a curate and serve the Bar Convent from the parish. In 1924, a house was started in Egton Bridge. This is it. Bottom left picture shows the house. Top picture shows the actual bridge of Egton Bridge, and the final picture on the right shows the stepping stones which form one of the ways across to the back part of the house. The lady looks as though she's having some difficulty with a narrow skirt. In April, Mother Alacock and Mother Phillip were motored over to Egton Bridge by Mr. Oxtoby the painter for him to give his estimate. This reference to travel by car concludes a series of firsts with new inventions. Telephone installed in the Superior's room, 1875, not in the rest of the house till 1923. Priests in the garden taking photographs in 1876, magic lantern bought in 1881, Telegrams start coming in 1883. A gas stove is installed in the kitchen in 1882, with help and instruction from a Jesuit brother who came from Mount St. Mary's. Electric trams in Nunnery Lane, 1913, so noisy that parts of the school had to be moved elsewhere in the house. So much in the diaries that is interesting, too much to cover everything, even in the odd details. In December 1876, iron goods received from Messrs. Rankin, Liverpool, in payment of £106 10 in school fees owed for the Mrs. Rankin since 1866. The gift of a tiger skin from a grateful parent in India in 1879. No record of what became of it. And an interesting sign of progress for women. In January 1916, Miss Piggott, gym mistress for 9 years, leaves to become a lady doctor. What has not changed in the 60 years covered by these volumes of the house diaries is the community's readiness to meet challenges, its openness to needs, its resourcefulness and zest for life. The qualities already seen in the women who left for continental Europe with Mary Ward, and in those who returned with Frances Bedingfield in 1686.